mentioned, it does give you information about internalizing, externalizing, and attention dimensions. And it breaks things down too. Is like, is this something that's clinically significant? Is this something we really need to be worried about? Is this more kind of in the borderline range that, you know, something we should keep an eye out for, maybe re-administer later and see if this is getting worse? Or is it something that's in the normal range? The child does not have a problem in this area. The gain is for kids that are over 13. And this, like as I mentioned, is the only one where you get information about substance use. But it also gives you information about internalizing and externalizing problems. And we have this sort of mantra that we use for people, like, remember they have to have 3 to be a problem. This is what it looks like, what the questionnaire would look like. So they would answer yes or no to whether or not they're having problems in these particular areas. So yes is a 1 and 0 is a no. They break it down into internalizing, externalizing, substance use, for example. And if they have 3 yeses in a particular area, then you know that they have a clinical problem. So for this 14-year-old youth, what areas would you say that she's having a challenge in? Externalizing and substance abuse, right? Because she has 3 that are marked at least in each of those categories. The pediatric symptoms checklist, as I said, this one, again, like I think there's 17 items on this measure. It's super quick to administer. It's incredibly easy to score, and it's free. Did I mention that? Some people are like that component of it. Again, it breaks things down into internalizing, externalizing, and attention issues. So what it basically, you know, the parent goes through, completes the form about never, sometimes, or often their child has issues with certain areas. And then it's sort of coded over here where they add up all of the black dots, all of the little diamonds, and then add up all the ones that don't have anything next to them for their different areas. It's just really, it's already coded and it's easy. It's just 17 items. And then if they're over, you know, a certain threshold of 5 or 7, depending on what it is, you would say that they had a problem in that area. It's really straightforward, easy to administer. And so I'm a big fan of that scale. It's similar, oh yeah.
What was the age range for the pediatric one again?
Pediatric, I think it's 3 to 17. It goes all the way up, which is nice. And it's the same thing with the strengths and difficulties questionnaire. This is another one that is, the website is sdqinfo.org in the public domain. And just like the pediatric symptoms checklist, they have parent, teacher, and youth report. Then you would only have a youth report if they're at least 11 years old. But again, it divides things nicely into that internalizing, externalizing kind of domains that we talked about before. It's valid, and the thing that's really cool about strengths and difficulties questionnaire, especially here in Seattle, is that it has tons of well-validated language translations as well. So I pulled out some of the common languages that we see here that it's available, but there's like 70 languages now that they have it translated into. And so that can be really nice to have as a resource for families. And this is what it looks like. Again, just kind of similar to the other ones. It's either not true, somewhat true, or certainly true. And the reason I like the strengths and difficulties questionnaire is it asks some things that are kind of more reverse scored. So it asks them in a positive way. So it would say, like, considerate of other people's feelings, shares readily with other children, for example, toys, treats, pencils, has at least one good friend. So it's not that the parents are constantly reporting on the deficits that they feel like their child has. They're given an opportunity to report on their strengths too. And so you get information about how pro-social the child is, but then some of these are also ways that they ask about challenges. So, you know, if they answer not true to has at least one good friend, you know, that's a problem. You know, so you can kind of interpret it both ways, but it doesn't make it, the parents' experience when they're completing this questionnaire is much more positive, and people report really enjoying completing this one over the CBCL quite dramatically. For me, it would just be like going through 135 versus 25 questions would be the thing, but I think also kind of asking about those positive items too. So I just wanted to give you all a sense of useful in making those characterizations. Are there any questions? There are other questionnaires that are out there as well. I just wanted, knowing we only have an hour, to kind of give you some that I think are probably the ones you're more likely to interact with, and that are easily available. Do you have any questions about those? Okay, great. So one of the challenges when we have a questionnaire, sometimes we have multiple reporters, right? And sometimes we don't always get the same information from one reporter to the next. So we tend, again, this is like way oversimplifying, and you would never use just a questionnaire in it by itself. You know, you would also consider, you know, how well you know the child and interview the parent and the child if possible. But in general, adults are better reporters of externalizing and acting out behavior problems. Kids don't tend to really admit to that kind of stuff as much, but also the acting out behavior problems are often things that the parents can see, right? So we put a little more stock. If the parent is reporting a lot of externalizing behavior problems and the child isn't, we might put a little more stock into what the parent's saying. So just like the issue that you mentioned about the GAIN SS, the kids can sometimes just say whatever. On the questionnaires, we don't always know how valid it is, and especially around substance use and certain things like that as well. So we put a little more stock in what the parents have to say. And then the converse of that is for the internalizing, the kind of more internal world of the young people that we work with. We tend to prioritize if we have to kind of pick, if there's conflicting information between parents and their children around internalizing, we would weight a little more heavily the child report on the internalizing, because they're privy a little bit more to the struggles that they're having internal and may not be sharing that as much with their caregivers, right? So we would prioritize that, and, you know, I guess we're kind of taking everything into consideration. So do you all agree with that? So what I'm going to talk about now is just the externalizing, internalizing attention issues. This is tantrum scene, do not cross. Hopefully none of your all's homes look like that after your kids have their tantrums. But I'm going to share with you a little bit of the training that we did with the caseworkers for Project Focus, because I think this breaks down nicely into what are these externalizing behavioral issues and what do we need to be thinking about. So as we already mentioned, problems could include things like rule breaking, angry outbursts, not obeying, aggression. The principle behind treatment of externalizing behavior problems, if you had to put it in a nutshell, is that behavior is reinforced by things in the environment or the people that are in their environment, right? So most kids get something out of being naughty, right? So what are some examples of things they get out of being naughty? They get attention. It's a huge one.
Driving their parents crazy.
They get, yeah.
Reaction, you know.
Yeah, they get a reaction. There's something happens that's interesting, maybe where life wasn't as interesting before they were naughty.
If it's at school, they can stay home.
Yeah, sometimes we have these sort of secondary gains where like they'll do something and get to stay home or have to avoid a situation that they didn't want to be in the first place.
And it's also pushing boundaries, too.
Mm-hmm. So they just want to test the limits and see. Good. Because there's usually something they're getting out of acting out, we have to do something in the environment to change that situation. So it's very unlikely that we can talk kids into behaving well and convince them that it's in their best interest, right? It's not usually, that's not usually what's most effective. Now that's not to say as kids get a little older and more cognitively developed that you can't have rational conversations with them about their behavior. But you really have to look to the environment and what's reinforcing that behavior and what's not reinforcing the behavior. So the types of strategies that are most effective for dealing with externalizing behavior problems are things that involve the caregiver, or, you know, in the case of the school, would involve like the school environment, as you mentioned as well. And so in this way, a lot of the strategies that we think about take the parent and try to turn the parent into the therapist, right? So in a way, they're kind of teaching the parent how to interact differently with their child to remove those contingencies at reinforcement. So maybe if your child's engaging in mild naughty behavior, it's not hurting anybody or anything, you might, like, you know, you were saying attention is a big motivator. You might coach the parent to remove attention as opposed to give attention, and how that maintains that behavior. So you kind of think about it that way. situations. But we don't really think about the work with the child as the most active ingredient. It can be really helpful, but it's not the thing that's going to get us the most movement. So the key here is behavior therapy with the caregiver is what's really important. So when we have an externalizing behavior problem, we want to see involvement with the caregiver. Does everybody agree with that? Is this all stuff you've heard before? Some sort of.
Now, would you say there is a certain age though that isn't the case?
Say more about that.
Well, so understanding that we're looking at working with caregivers to change behaviors, but at what point, if the child is, I don't know, 17, where really the behavior is no, I don't know what to say.
Parent has less control maybe or less influence.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when you get to the late adolescence, that becomes a real challenge. And there's not a lot of programs that are out there that actually deal with the age range for that very reason, because you don't have, from a societal standpoint, the child's on their way out, right? They're about to turn 18, they're about to be independent. The caregiver may or may not, have as much influence, but we still really do look at what kinds of environmental contingencies. The parent is still always the most, until the child moves out of the home, is still a really relevant person. But what we look at is, like peers oftentimes maintain a lot of challenging behaviors for kids that get around that age. So we work with the caregiver on like monitoring and supervision and how do we kind of think about that, addressing issues with the peer group and that kind of thing. So we look a little more broadly. We tend to, as kids get a little more up through adolescence, we tend to shift away from a straight up kind of behavioral approach to what's called an ecological model. And so we would look more towards what are broader than just the parents. What are the factors in the community and the peer group and the school system and vocational stuff that the kid's doing and try to look at from a standpoint of how's the child functioning in each of these different areas and try to navigate that a little more as they get older. What are some specific programs that target the externalizing behavioral issues for kids in Washington? There's more than just these that are available. In fact, there's a whole world. This is probably one of the areas where there's like 1,000 different programs out there. But I wanted to let you know of some really good ones that are here in Washington State. Parent-child interaction therapy, who's heard of that? Good percentage of folks run one of the best programs in PCIT in the state here. So here, for PCIT, caregivers are coached to respond to the child differently than how they have in the past. So they praise positive behavior, ignore obnoxious behavior, annoying behavior, right? And then it really works at enhancing the parent-child relationship. And in this particular program, you have a parent-child dyad working together. So half the time the parent and child are together in the therapy, and then half the time it's just the parent alone learning skills and strategies. The Incredible Years, this is one that was developed out of the University of Washington, Carolyn Webster Stratton's program. Are people familiar with that at all? This one is another, it's done in groups where there's videos that parents watch. They respond to those videos. It teaches them how to decrease behavior problems, increase positive behaviors. And they can, parents can interact with this program on different intensity levels depending on what kind of need they have. So this is done in groups. The Triple P, Positive Parenting Program, is, again, it's another intervention that works just with the parents. It teaches them strategies for improving their relationships with their kids, teaching new skills and managing misbehaviors. You can see the theme already, right, across all these programs. And this is done in either individual or group sessions. So deciding between, these different types of programs for younger kids, a lot of times it just depends on what's available in your particular area. I think all of these programs are available in King County. But when you get outside of there, it's a little more sporadic where they're available. Sometimes it's parent preference. They want to be in a group setting. They'd rather we need the more intensive kind of bug in the ear approach they use with PCIT, that kind of